Ladies and gentlemen, to all the teachers and educators, to PAFTE organizers, to the participating researchers, and to the panel of reactors, good day, everyone. It is absolutely a privilege for me to be participating at this prestigious 51st National and 12th International PAFTE Convention, an avenue for teacher researchers to share their empirical studies at various levels of educational system, continuing professional development, and with a novel aim to give an invaluable contribution to our respective field of discipline. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be the oral presenter for my research paper entitled The Mamanwa's Experiences on Inclusive Education Amidst COVID-19, Basis for the Transitional Plan to the New Normal and Educational Management. Co-authored, of course, by Sister Marie Rizan Maliling SPC. I am Odi Condesa Navarro Gorticacion. Before I proceed further, I and my co-author come from Surigao City, situated at the northeasternmost tip of Mindanao, and is popularly known as the City of Island Adventures, and is popularly known and considered a haven of leisure and adventure because it has panoramic islands with long stretches of pristine white sand beaches in Surigao and in Lucas Grande Island. I am also highlighting the Grand St. Paul University Surigao, where I am teaching in general education and professional education for a couple of years now. I am now ready to present the research exploring the Mamanwa's experiences in inclusive education amidst COVID-19, basis for transitional plan to the new normal and educational management. Inclusive education is a learning environment where young people with or without indigenous backgrounds are taught together as equals, according to Day and to Care of 2020. Inclusive education is practiced in the Philippines and it fosters a learning environment that promotes lifelong learning. But at present, the most significant havoc in the history of the educational system has since been brought about by the COVID-19 crisis, and it forced educational improvements on protecting the most vulnerable student groups at risk of glaring inequalities, according to UNESCO 2020. DepEd realigned the educational system to support the government's preventative action against the virus, according to Medinilla of 2020. The transition to distance learning has brought different challenges for students, such as including barriers to engaging with technology, reduced access to educational supports, and learning interventions. Due to these problems, which are common in many rural groups, the educational gap for people identified as ITs is more apparent while using this mode of learning, according to Chavez of 2020. So the purpose of this study is to shed light on how the Philippine educational system was affected by COVID-19 in view of this current global problem. There is a need to understand the full extent of the problem and of the phenomenon by looking into the experiences of key participants in light of the current crisis. There are academic studies of students' lived experiences, but the specific educational insights of Mamanwa learners who continue their educational through inclusive education as they live out at present have not been written. Compared to the research previously mentioned, this study is different because it expands the educational narrative through the viewpoints of students from the Mamanwa community set in a unique situation. So the study aimed to explore the indigenous experiences on inclusive education amidst COVID-19, particularly the students of the Mamanwa community in Mainit, Surigao del Norte. So to fully understand the experiences this study explored the fundamental questions. First, what are the experiences and challenges of the Mamanwa learners in Surigao del Norte in the conduct of inclusive education amidst COVID-19? Second, how are the experiences and challenges of the indigenous people, particularly the Mamanwa learners, in the new normal contextualized under inclusive education? Third, what are the emergent themes of these experiences? Fourth, what is the essence of these experiences? And last question, based on the findings, what recommendations, basis of a transitional plan to the new normal and educational management in inclusive schools may be proposed? So as we can see here there is this simulacrum of the study. This study was guided by indigenous holistic theory, context theory, sociocultural theory, and self-efficacy theory. In particular, the idea of Alport's contact theory supports inclusive education. It deals with social contact that can improve relationships between members of the majority and minority groups. This theory is particularly relevant to inclusive education settings as it supports an equitable school culture and forms the basis of awareness and education programs. Meanwhile, to understand the indigenous holistic theory, this theory is founded on indigenous worldviews, cultures, and traditions, 2020. So this theory enables the readers to comprehend indigenous people's history, culture, customs, and worldviews as it justifies the inclusion of minority viewpoints in educational curricula. To understand experiences of the indigenous learners, one theory to consider also is the sociocultural theory. This is an idea of how socialization influences learning, especially cognitive development. As such, Vygotsky stresses that learning has its basis in interacting with other people. From the sociocultural perspectives, mental growth is guided, in part, by people in their lives who are in the mentor-type roles, such as teachers and parents. Moreover, the self-efficacy theory denotes a person's confidence in their capacity to achieve in a specific circumstance. This positive way of thinking, believing that one cannot accomplish goals they set for themselves and improve their mood when confronted with challenging situations. Thus, conducting a research study concerning the experiences of these theories were found essential in understanding the experiences of the participants, particularly the Mamanwa learners, on inclusive education amid COVID-19. For the method on the research design, this study used qualitative phenomenological research design. The descriptive phenomenological method of Georgi 2003 was used to analyze the data. There were 10 selective indigenous learners, the Mamanwa of Mainis Surigao del Norte, who were enrolled in the mainstream during the school year of 2021-2022, where the study's target participants using the purposive sampling technique. The researchers used interview protocol for the conduct of an in-depth interview, open-ended, and semi-structured interview to acquire the data needed in understanding the authentic experiences and the key participants. The questions were formulated according to the areas need to explore. So to elicit stories from research participants, the questions that are part of the phenomenological interview met the criteria of description. The interview guide questions were presented first to the chieftain of the tribe, members of the tribal council, and parents for consent before the conduct of the interview proper with the participants. During also the data gathering, we partner with NCIP, regional and provincial office. So in their pursuit In the pursuit to understand the experiences of the indigenous people, the descriptive phenomenological research of Georgie was deemed to be the most suitable for the study, as it focuses the meaning of the lived experiences for several individuals about the concept of a phenomenon, according to Murley of 2017. So this method allows me, the researcher, to retain the voice of the participants without abstracting their viewpoint through analysis. Applying this data gathering technique to the current study would help to account for reactions, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and impressions that emerge from the data. So these factors assisted in a comprehensive level of understanding of the participants' experiences. So as we can see now on the screen, I am now showing the result. So the experiences and challenges of the indigenous people, particularly the Mamanwa learners, in the conduct of inclusive education amidst COVID-19 were consumed by the significant statements of the participants and form clustered themes. The findings showed concepts that were exhibited by the participants. They said that they faced school challenges and found schoolwork difficult for them. Although they accepted the challenge of modular delivery mode, but they got trouble learning by just using modules and felt burdened by its loads of activities. At times, they could understand the lessons and were able to answer their modules by themselves. But added to their challenge in inclusive education amidst this COVID-19 were the internet shortage and lack of technology to use. For all students to have equitable access to and participation in online learning environments, or the entire educational system, inclusivity is necessary. That's according to UNESCO of 2020. But due to the shifting condition prevailing the world, inclusive education in the study needs to be reformulated in a deeper perspective, as it shows that not all students were able to perform schoolwork well because of their circumstances. And so they desired face-to-face classes as they wanted to finish their studies, although somehow they had a positive attitude toward modular-based learning and still had the determination to overcome the challenges of being students. The challenges in the new normal as contextualized under inclusive education this time of COVID pandemic were evident, particularly among the Mamanwa learners, the young indigenous people. Most of them have difficulties with schoolwork, trouble understanding the lesson and learning by just using modules, and stress in dealing with load of activities. Although inclusive education is for all regardless of ethnicity, it created inequality for the indigenous learners who did not have internet access or sufficient technical equipment and lack of human resources to assist their studies. International organizations often link inclusion to the UNESCO policy of education for all, which is committed to ensuring that all young people received basic quality education according to Armstrong of 2020. Yet, the results of this study demonstrate that Mamanwa learners in Mainis Regal del Norte, inclusive education can be understood as an equal educational opportunity for only young people who receive full support on what they need right now to their education amid this COVID-19 crisis. Utilizing Georgie's step-by-step process of phenomenological data analysis, I, as the researcher, extracted 88 significant statements reflecting on the experiences of the participants, which evolved into the development of the meaning units. Then 3 themes were drawn from the informant's narrative data. The three themes were the self-efficacy, an attitudinal factor of an attitudinal factor of coping the challenges in inclusive education, family as foundation of motivational support to cope with challenges of modular distance learning, and self-paced flexible learning, embracing inclusive education in the new normal. The essence of these experiences is the global theme, self-determination in the new normal. So what is the self-determination in the new normal? Self-determination in the new normal means that it is the global perspective for ITs that drives them to overcome challenges and difficult circumstances they experience in most of their lives situation as indigenous people, particularly during this time of pandemic. Indigenous peoples face multiple barriers to participating fully in inclusive education. However, this IT hold vital knowledge and expertise on how to adapt, mitigate, and reduce risk, which could mean their inner strength and capabilities of survival in the midst of crisis. Postulate by their survival instincts, self-determination is seen as their strength. And inclusive education has long been recognized as both a human right in itself and an indispensable means of realizing other fundamental rights and freedom as a vehicle to uplift people from poverty, social development, and empowerment. IT communities find it very important and compelling to improve the overall sustainability, development and progress. These hard, complex circumstances do not bar indigenous peoples, particularly the schooled ones, to proceed with inclusive education. They override all the barriers and self-determination prevailed despite all odds. Self-determination is an overarching global perspectives in the life of the indigenous people. Self-determination in inclusive education helps visualize their life and gives them the power to navigate change and embrace transition that help them gain control of life's circumstances. So this is the idiotic framework of the Mamanwa's experiences on inclusive education amidst COVID-19. The conclusion. In the abrupt transition to distance learning, the Mamanwa learners have been facing and experiencing multiple challenges that pose enormous risks to their educational and physical existence, including, among other things, the limited access to remote learning opportunities. Because indigenous children lack access to adequate preparatory materials, there is a high risk that they would be left behind, and the pandemic impact will last throughout their academic and working lives. COVID-19 has had a diverging impact in their community. In as much as inclusion is desired in the class, this situation promotes exclusion and hampers learning. The modular delivery mode has considerate costs for continuing basic education, despite the current crisis on COVID-19. It is timely act of support for the global effort to attain education for all. For the recommendation, we have for the Mamanwa learners, the young indigenous students should exert more effort to understand the current situation. Indeed, studying amidst COVID-19 crisis is hard. However, looking beyond the difficulties and focusing on the opportunities and personal growth it brought is better. It is challenging to study while dealing with COVID-19 crisis, but it is best to look and focus on the opportunities and personal growth. Parents should continuously support their children in the academic, emotional, and financial aspects. Enhance participation and collaboration, not just with the parents, but the entire community as well. Teachers must strengthen student-to-teacher communication to avoid weakening the relationship primarily stabilized in school. The Department of Education. DepEd should conduct seminar workshops on teaching strategies for teachers in handling students with indigenous backgrounds in inclusive setting. Local government, the LGU, should strengthen programs that support students' internet access at home, as it revealed from the study that the majority of the participants struggled with connectivity and technology resources. Moreover, based on this research, providing support for students' access to the internet at home is relevant for remote education, and the provision of at least some kind of digital device such as smartphones, since some families do not have access to that digital device and cannot necessarily afford internet connectivity, especially during an economic downturn. Even in the context of reopening the face-to-face classes in school, internet access at home will remain important to continue education. Now, for the sixth recommendation, as stated that the Department of Education is preparing for the full face-to-face classes to begin on November 2, the researcher recommended a course of action as basis for transitional plan to the new normal, to the new post-pandemic normal. So, as we can see on the screen, here's another first something on the basis of DepEd. We have classes resume normal operations and walk-in services for students with safety and local restrictions should be followed. Face mask covering is required for preventing disease spread, and social distancing rules continue to apply. Third, professional support services in schools, such as incorporating guidance counseling weekly scheduled. A service like this play important role in the mental health and well-being and the holistic development of all learners. This service is essential in inclusive education. And then for four, professional support services in schools, such as incorporating guidance counseling, weekly scheduled, as services like this play important role in the mental health. Foster small group activities among students to increase inclusivity, leveraging their capabilities to learn and work together as long as social distancing and safety guidelines are followed. Now, for the last recommendation on based on the findings, I as the researcher recommended to schools an educational management, and these are as follows. So we have management of curriculum, and we have several activities suggested here. We also have student management, management of teachers and educational personnel. We have management of facilities. We have management of school and community relationships. And before we end this presentation, I will leave you with this quote. Education is universal human right essential to bridging gaps in human well-being, equity, and opportunity. According to Jenna Constantino, Indigenous People Advisory Consultant. And some of the major references are here. And thank you for listening to me. God bless you all.